Hello everybody, welcome to my remaster of Altergeist Academy, How to Play Them Well. And this video is a redo of my last one because I had terrible audio quality. I do apologize for that, hopefully this time it's better. There's also a few extra techniques I've picked up along the way that I can pass on to you guys as well. Alright, so Altergeists. What we're going to go over in this presentation is the three-phase game plan of your main goals to guide you while you're playing the Altergeists. Home zones, which is like sub-guidance beyond the overarching three-phase game plan. Some micro combos to help you recognize when you might have some particular synergies, when otherwise you might think you've just got a dead hand. Linking into Hexstia, when to do it and what it accomplishes. And then how to play in each phase, referring to the three-phase game plan from before. Once we've gone through steps 1 to 4, then we'll be able to really talk about how to actually play the deck properly, and that's what step 5 in this presentation is about. And finally, in 6, this is new to the remaster, I've got some advanced variations of Altergeist decks and different gameplay that still keeps in mind the fundamentals that I've taught earlier in the presentation. So with that, let's get cracking. So the three-phase game plan. Phase 1, survive, Phase 2, control, and Phase 3, dominate. So we're going to go through them, but not in order. We're actually going to start with Phase 2, because Phase 2 is the most critical phase. If you understand Phase 2, then you have the context necessary to understand Phase 1 and 3. So, Phase 2 control, what's it about? At its core, it's about this loop here of Altergeist Circuitous, Altergeist Conqueror, and Altergeist Manifestation. And what this does is it essentially negates 3 attacks. It technically negates 2, and it renders a third useless. And the way it works is, if you've got Circuitous in play already, your opponent attacks. You've got Conqueror in your hand, you activate Conqueror, which negates the attack and special summons Conqueror. If your opponent attacks with a second monster, you use Circuitous to return Conqueror to your hand. Because you're still in the part of the game where your opponent has just declared an attack, we're not on a new chain, and the reason for that is because Circuitous returned Conqueror as cost. Conqueror can activate again, it's not a once per turn, it activates, negates the second attack, and returns itself to the field. When you return to the hand as Circuitous' cost, the benefit you got for that, Circuitous' actual effect, is to return a card an opponent controls to their hand. And so, in this case, you could have returned a third scary monster. So you've just nullified 3 of the opponent's attacks. Altergeist Conqueror is disproportionately powerful in Duel Links, and the key to playing Altergeist well in Duel Links is to lean into this fact. The reason it's so strong compared to the TCG or Master Duel is because your opponent has a maximum of 4 monster zones. If you're negating or nullifying 3 of your opponent's attacks, then really there's only 1 attack that's getting through, and you can make sure it's the one that really doesn't matter. So what's the Altergeist Manifestation for? The Altergeist Manifestation is here because this allows you to start making link plays and still get your core loop going. For example, you can use Manifestation on something, link away Circuitous and something else. Circuitous will trigger, get back the Manifestation, you can set the Manifestation, get back a Circuitous, for example. It just keeps you stable within Phase 2. And importantly, the Manifestation needs to be set at the end of your turn to be in a truly stable position for Phase 2. So now we understand what Phase 2 is about. What is Phase 1? Phase 1 is basically survive until we get to Phase 2. This is the most volatile part of the game for Altergeist. This is the part where your opponent has the highest chance to win, and typically this is where they're trying to outmaneuver you and kill you before you can get to Phase 2. So first thing, it's very rare to open with the Phase 2 setup already in your hand, which would require Circuitous that you can normal summon, a Conqueror in your hand, and a set Manifestation. Conqueror is at 1 in Duel Links, as in you can only obtain 1 copy, and so your odds of opening it are already very low, and you will never play more than 2 Circuituses in your deck. So opening both of these cards and a Manifestation is pretty low odds. Even if you did open all 3 of these cards, it's not actually the best opener, because it lays your pieces out on the board in a very vulnerable way. Your Circuitous cannot activate until the battle phase. well, it's the 2 conditions Silkwoodus could activate if you've just laid it out on the board like this. When your opponent attacks, you can activate Conquery, summon Conquery, and now your Silkwoodus can activate, because it can return the Conquery. If the Silkwoodus dies, then you can use Manifestation to get back the Silkwoodus, and then Silkwoodus can target the Manifestation to return something to the opponent's hand. But both of these are very situational and not ideal. Your opponent has a lot of opportunities to interrupt your Silkwoodus in your combo before it gets going. So usually if you did open this, you'd actually want to link away your Silkwoodus, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself now. Given that we're not heading straight into Phase 2 at the start of the game, what are we trying to do in Phase 1? Well, we're trying to open up with some control elements and spring Phase 2 on the opponent at a time of our choosing, which is basically as late as possible, so the opponent has the fewest options to deal with it. And when I say as late as possible, I mean as late as possible in the opponent's turn. I don't mean in actual turn timer for the game. So the ideal opener to accomplish this is Altergeist Meluseek and Altergeist Manifestation, as it leads to the entire Phase 2 setup. And the way it works is you normal summon Meluseek, you link it away into Linkuriboh. Meluseek triggers and searches for Altergeist Multifaker. You set the manifestation. In your opponent's turn at a time of your choosing, you activate the Altergeist Manifestation to return the Meluseek. In a new chain, Altergeist Multifaker triggers in your hand because you just activated a trap. It special summons itself. With Multifaker, you special summon Silkwoodus from the deck. You use Silkwoodus to return the manifestation to your hand and return an opponent's card to their hand. And then Meluseek triggers because now it's your opponent's turn, so it hasn't triggered already this turn, because when you turn the manifestation, the Meluseek dies. When the Meluseek triggers, you search for Conquery in your hand, and now you have a Conquery in your hand and a Meluseek on the board, and with your bounce and the Conquery negate, and the Linkuriboh, you are unlikely to lose your Silkwoodus, which means you lead into your turn with a Silkwoodus on the board, and you can set the manifestation and a Conquery in your hand, because in your turn you can return a Conquery to your hand with a Silkwoodus is effective to return another card of the opponent's to their hand. So that's just Meluseek plus manifestation gives you the entire Phase 2 setup, and that's why I run 3 and 3, but I'm not really going to give full deck building advice in this this presentation, as things can change. This is supposed to be a general overview. Marionetta and Multifaker gets us most of the way to the Phase 2 setup. It misses the Conquery. So if you have Multifaker in your hand, then you can normal summon the Marionetta. Use Marionetta to find any chainable Altergeist trap, such as Altergeist Manifestation. If you link away the Marionetta, then you can use Manifestation to trigger the Multifaker in your hand. Or you could get, if you're playing them, some other Altergeist trap as well. If you don't have these openers, and of course when the Multifaker triggers from your hand, you're going to get Silkwoodus. If you don't have these openers, then you might have some micro combos, some other ways to help you survive and buy time until you do draw into them. A really easy way to think of Phase 1 is your main priority is to trigger Multifaker. Once you've triggered Multifaker once, maybe twice, then you're usually set up to head into Phase 2. So with Phase 1 and Phase 2 out of the way, now let's talk about Phase 3. Phase 3 I call Dominate, and it's honestly just a mere formality. It's defined by indefinite resource loops that grind advantage. So what can you do in this phase? Well, as we see here, you have easy access. Now, this is the key. Easy access to spell and trap negates, attack negates. You can bounce cards, you can send cards to the GY, you can retrieve cards from the GY, you have high attack monsters, you have a high number of cards in hands. Once you're at this phase of the game, there are no single cards in the game that an opponent can top deck to recover. Probably. I mean, never say never. I haven't thought about literally every single card in the game, but it's very unlikely your opponent's going to win. This is the phase where you dominate. I say it's a mere formality because you have already won. It's just a matter of actually running the game through. So, once Phase 2 has comfortably survived an entire enemy turn, the main way to lose is to defeat yourself. By grinding your gears too much, and some things down here I'll get to in a moment. Good opponents who trust in your abilities will always concede by the time you get to Phase 3, because it's only on you to lose here. Altergeist players have lots of opportunities to set themselves back with their own cards. and that delays the onset of phase 3 and it weakens the position of phase 2. So here's some examples, right? If you return Multifaker to your hand to pay for Silquitous' costs, when there are other options, the odds are you've actually just made a bad play. If you link away Concurry, the odds are you've just made a bad play. If you search too much with Meluseek, if you use spoofing to put Altergeist Manifestation back on your deck, it's a cool trick you can do, but it's still often actually a bad play. And then summoning to the wrong zones. This one's actually really tricky, making sure your zones are lined up for Hexstia. But all of these, sometimes they're correct, but most of the time they are bad plays, and when I get to the next phase of the presentation, you'll understand why. But I just want to talk a little bit more about when you transition to phase 3. So when I say phase 2 has comfortably survived an entire enemy turn, what I mean is your opponent's passing the turn back to you, you've still got maybe a Silquitous in play, your manifestation might be used, but it's probably still set. Basically, it means you can consolidate your resources into the phase 3 phase of the game with using minimal per turn resources. So your per turn resources are your ability to activate set traps, they're your ability to normal summon. These are limited resources. Using Multifaker's ability to special summon, it's a hard once per turn. This will make more sense later on in the presentation when I talk about linking into Hexstia and when I talk about how to play in each phase. But for now, just trust me, at some point in phase 2, you'll get to the point where you can move into phase 3. Before we get there, let's talk about home zones. So this is a concept I've come up with that helps you make genuinely good decisions to help you transition between the 3 phases or survive while you're in them. If you don't know what to do, think back to this concept of home zones. So what is this concept? Every Altergeist card has different zones that it's good or bad in, and understanding these helps you make generally good decisions when you're under pressure. Maybe the timer's running down, for example. When I say zones here, I don't mean monster zones and spell trap zones, I mean zones like hand, field, graveyard, and deck. Those are the main zones I'm talking about here. So, home zones I define as good, neutral, and bad for the different Altergeist cards. A good zone is a zone where a card can perform well because its abilities work well there, or it can easily move to another zone for strong benefit, or it's easily accessible from the zone it's in to go to another good zone. And so an example of a good zone for Altergeist Silquitous, for example, is the field. Silquitous has a really good effect on the field, and you kind of want Silquitous to be on the field so you can use her effect. A neutral zone is a zone where the card can make some contribution from the zone, but often it uses the zone to transition to a good zone. It will usually be better to transition to a good zone, but there's no pressure to do so. So if we use Silquitous as an example again, I think I say it's the deck is the neutral zone for Silquitous, because Silquitous doesn't contribute from the deck, but you often want to get it out of the deck with Multifaker. And it can be got out of the deck quite easily because of Multifaker. And a bad zone here is a zone where the card does not contribute, and you've got to make quite a large effort to get it to change zones from this zone. So a neutral zone you can think of, it could make some contribution, but it probably doesn't, but it's quite easy to change zones, whereas a bad zone, it's hard to change zones, or it requires multiple zone swaps to get it to a good zone. So for example, if Altergeist Silquitous is in your hand, personal spoofing aside, it's quite hard to get Silquitous back into a good zone. Another way to think of phase 2, other than the manifestation Concurry Silquitous loop, is to think of when you've got every card in a good or neutral zone at least. When I say every card, I mean every name. I don't mean literally every single card. Just one of Silquitous, one of Meluseek, one of Marionetta, one of Multifaker, for example, all in good or neutral zones. So, I've created 2 slides here that go over the good Altergeist cards and which zones they're good in. So here's the first slide, and here's the second one. These slides both present almost the same information, just organized in a different way, so whichever helps you learn, you can just choose the one that's good for you. I'm going to use this slide to talk about it, because I think it makes more sense as an initial impression. So, we'll start with Altergeist Silquidus. So as I said before, the field is a good zone for Silquidus, as is the graveyard. So why is the graveyard a good zone for Silquidus? Well, she has a favourable trigger when she goes from the field to the graveyard. She can return an Altergeist track from your graveyard to your hand, and this is actually a core part of your resource loop. So even though once she's gone there and she's finished triggering, she doesn't really contribute from the graveyard, she's easy to get back out of the graveyard back onto the field because of Altergeist Manifestation or Altergeist Marionetta. So the good zones for Silquidus are the field and graveyard. Graveyard is actually kind of between neutral and good. The neutral zones for Silquidus are the deck. She doesn't contribute in the deck as I already explained, but she's really easy to move from the deck to the field, which is one of the good zones for Silquidus. The bad zone for Silquidus is the hand, as I already mentioned. To get onto the field, you have to normal summon her, which, sure, that's easy, you just normal summon her, but Altergeists have 2 other cards which are competing for your normal summon, and usually do something a lot better with that normal summon. So having Silquidus in your hand is a bad thing. Conquery, good zone is the hand. Absolutely fantastic effect in the hand. It does that. Basically, Conquery's main purpose of negating attacks happens from the hand. The neutral zone for Conquery is on the field. It's really easy to get Conquery back from the field into the hand, and you do that using Silquidus' effect. Conquery does actually have an effect on the field. It can negate another face-up card for as long as it and Conquery are both face-up. And that can be relevant, and when it's relevant, it's usually very relevant. But it's not the main purpose of Conquery, it's a secondary purpose, so usually the hand is the good zone for Conquery, and in very rare circumstances I would move field, I promote it to a good zone rather than neutral zone for Conquery. The bad zones for Conquery are the deck and the graveyard. The deck is, it's between a bad and a neutral zone, because sure, it's quote-unquote easy to get Conquery out of the deck because Altergeist Melee-Seek can just search Conquery directly. However, Melee-Seek usually has pressure to find Multi-Faker first, so it's not that it takes multiple steps to get Conquery from the deck to your hand, it's that it takes multiple tries from searching to get Conquery from your deck to your hand. So you're trying to get Conquery out of the deck, so then there's no pressure to search it. The graveyard is also a bad zone for Conquery. There's no benefit to putting Conquery in the graveyard. And if you want to get Conquery back to a good zone, the hand, you usually have to go through the intermediary zone of the field. And that takes 2 zone moves. You've got to go from the graveyard to the field and the field to the hand, which can eat into your action economy, which I'll talk about a bit more later. So for this reason, this is why linking away Conquery is often a bad idea, because you move it from a good zone, from a neutral zone to a bad zone. You're actually downgrading your zones for Conquery. So Multi-Faker. So for good zones, I've put the graveyard and the hand, but only in phase 1 and maybe the start of phase 2, like the end, like the transitioning phase between 1 and 2. So why is Multi-Faker good in the graveyard? It doesn't have an effect when it goes to graveyard, but it's really easy to move Multi-Faker from the graveyard to the field, and then when Multi-Faker gets to the field, it has an amazing effect. And this is the same reason it's good in the hand. When you trigger Multi-Faker in the hand, it gets onto the field and does an amazing effect. But this is only really useful in phase 1 from the hand, because Multi-Faker's effect has diminishing returns. Once you've searched all of your pieces, you don't really need the effect anymore, and then all it becomes, it's not about getting cards into good zones, it's about just producing extra monsters. And extra monsters can be useful to give you link material, but you can't make generic link monsters in the turn that use Multi-Faker's effect, so you're just making Hexstias or Prime Banshees, and your need to do that diminishes as the game goes on. So Multi-Faker's effect starts off as one of the best things you can do in the game, and then quickly becomes quite mid. So that's why you really only need to trigger once or twice, and that's really like phase 1 or the transition phase where it's good in the hand. Neutral zones are the field and the hand. So it's good in the it's neutral in the field because once it's triggered, once it's there, it's done its thing, and it doesn't really do anything else. It just kind of acts as link material most of the time. And the hand in phase 2 and 3 is just the other side of the coin of why it's good in phase 1. Phase 2 and 3 it just drops off, but at least you can easily get it out of the hand by using its effect to special summon itself. The bad zones are the deck, it doesn't do anything there, and you want to get it out of the deck as soon as possible, so then you can use it to get other things out of the deck. For Meluseek, the good zones are the field and the graveyard. Meluseek is... Meluseek is good on the field because it can go to the graveyard and then trigger its effect to search for another Altergeist card and move it from the deck to the hand. Meluseek has an on-field effect, which sometimes comes up. Doesn't usually come up in phase 1 at the start, but we'll get to that later. So for that reason I've put the field as a good zone, but you can also think of the field as a neutral zone, as an intermediary to get from the hand to the graveyard. And so our neutral zones, we've got the hand and the deck. Deck, same reason as a lot of the other ones are bad in the deck. Oh well, Meluseek is neutral in the deck. It's actually a fine multi-faker search when you've already got Silverless access, for example. And in the hand, it consumes your normal summon to get it to the field, so it's not ideal, but it's acceptable. And it's as I showed in phase 1, it's actually your best turn 1 play. Marionetta, your good zones and your neutral zones are context dependent, depending on which phase you're in. In the hand, it's really good in phase 1 and 2. It's not as good as Meluseek, but it helps get you out of the way to your stabilization into phase 2. But in phase 3, once you've got all of your Altergeist traps already out of the deck, it doesn't have a normal summon effect anymore, and so now being in the hand is just a vehicle to get it onto the field. Once you are set up in phase, actually this field should really be phase 2 or 3, not just 3. And even actually phase 1, this actually is, the field might not be so context dependent, to be honest. The field is pretty good for Marionetta because it's got a really good effect to swap an Altergeist in play with an Altergeist in the graveyard. And that just gives you so much maneuverability with moving your Altergeist from bad zones into good zones or neutral zones or whatnot. Neutral zones is just the other side of the coin I was talking about from good zones, apart from we've also added the graveyard. It doesn't do anything in the graveyard, and it's often not a high priority to get out of the graveyard, but if it's in the graveyard, it's usually contributed something, so it's not actively bad to be in the graveyard. You don't often have to get it out of the graveyard like you do with Kankuro. So that's why it's not a bad zone. And it's bad in the deck for the same reasons as the other ones which are bad in the deck are bad in the deck. It doesn't contribute there, and it's not something that you want to search with multi-faker. Manifestation, the trap. That's good in the hand, field, and graveyard. Your goal with Manifestation is to have it set at the end of your turn, and that's easy to do, it's in the hand or the field, and it's good in the graveyard because Silverless can easily get it out of the graveyard. You could also consider graveyard to be a neutral zone for Manifestation. It has a graveyard effect, which sometimes comes up. It can banish itself to return another Altergeist trap from your graveyard to your hand, such as another copy of Manifestation if you don't have Silverless access yet. Bad zones of the deck, same reason, it just doesn't contribute in the deck. At least Marionetta can get it out of the deck. Here's the same information but with 3 additions. Linkuriboh is a real consideration in Altergeist, and it's good in the graveyard as opposed to being on the field. You don't actually want Linkuriboh on the field, you want to get rid of it as fast as possible. Same for any generic Link monster in Altergeist, they clog up your zones when you really want to be making Hexstia. So Linkuriboh, if your opponent attacks and you have Kankuro in your hand and you have a Linkuriboh, you often still want to just use Linkuriboh's effect just to get it off the field, even though you could negate the attack with Kankuro. And then we've got in these good zones here, and what's good in the deck is 1 Altergeist card, doesn't matter what it is, so that your personal spoofing is still live. And similarly, it's bad if you have 0 Altergeist left in your deck, because then your spoofing cannot activate. That's just a minor consideration to consider, and that's a reason why searching too much with Meluseek is bad, because you need to maintain a certain amount of Altergeist in your deck just so spoofing is live. So now you've learned the different home zones, what they're good and bad and neutral for the different cards, what to use them for. Use them to help inform your decisions when you're under pressure. So for example, Altergeists that are good in the graveyard are good as link material, and you can return Altergeists that are good in the hand for Silquitous' cost. If Multifaker is still going to be good in the hand, then sure, return it with Silquitous. But if we got to the phase of the game where Multifaker is no longer good in the hand, maybe return something else if you can, such as Altergeist Manifestation. Conqueror is really bad in the graveyard, so you don't want to link it away. But Melee-Seek is great, so you do want to link it away, as an example. Another important sub-concept when talking about home zones is mobility versus resource efficiency, or rather mobility efficiency versus resource efficiency. So what are they? Mobility efficiency is how efficient you are moving Altergeists to their most favourable zones with the least number of intermediary zones. And resource efficiency is about moving Altergeists to favourable zones and accruing advantage along the way. So for example, let's say we want to move Conqueror from the deck to the hand. The way that's a mobility efficient way to do it is you link Melee-Seek away and then you search Conqueror directly from the deck to the hand. Ta-da! You've got Conqueror from your bad zone, the deck, to the good zone, the hand. A more resource efficient way is if Multifaker special summons Conqueror from the deck to the field, and then Silquitous returns Conqueror to the hand as a cost to return an opponent's card to the hand. Now you've managed to not only get Conqueror into your hand, but you've also returned an opponent's card to their hand. You've disrupted them a little bit. So resource efficiency, I mean it as a sum of resources between you and your opponent. You can think of it as advantage efficiency, if that makes it easier. And so, why would you do one over the other? Well, mobility efficiency is important when you need to move multiple Altergeists in a short time, or when you urgently need to move an Altergeist to a better zone. So for example, if both Silquitous and Conqueror are in the graveyard, then a single manifestation will be overloaded to return both to more favourable zones. So mobility efficiency is more important here. Because if you want to you need to get Conqueror back into your hand. And manifestation can only do that by returning Conqueror, and then you already have a Silquitous to return Conqueror to hand. But if Silquitous is already in your graveyard, your manifestation has to return to Silquitous. So you need to find some way to move the Conqueror in fewer zone changes. And a good way to do that is with Prime Banshee, for example. Outside of Prime Banshee, it's quite hard, and this is why it's really not ideal to put Conqueror in the graveyard. If mobility efficiency is not required, then you aim for your resource or your advantage efficiency. So for example, if Melee-Seek dies in your opponent's turn in phase 1, you could immediately search for Conqueror to transition to phase 2. However, if there's no urgent need for Conqueror, you can instead search for Marionetta, and then in your turn, when you normal summon Marionetta, you get manifestation from your deck to the field as well. And then you can use Marionetta's effect to swap with the Melee-Seek in the graveyard, for example, link the Melee-Seek away, and then you get the search again to find Conqueror. So you still end up with a Conqueror in your hand, but you also manage to change manifestation from the bad zone of the deck to the good zone of the field. And it was more resource efficient. If you believe you're going to die without the Conqueror, or you need to preserve your Silquitous or something like that, then you need the mobility efficiency first. And this line is actually really important to playing Altergeist well. Altergeist is about getting away with as much resource efficiency as you can. Basically, always try and aim for resource or mobility efficiency, and then only if you can't get away with it, go for mobility efficiency. So now we're getting some little micro combos. This is kind of a really small section. It's just to help you realize, oh, I've got these cards, and it might not be obvious without it being brought to your attention that they actually form a little combo. So we've got Silca Manifestation. This is basically you get a compulsory evacuation device once per turn cycle. That can actually hit any card, not just monsters. So you normal summon the Silquitous, link it away, you set the manifestation. Whenever you like, use the manifestation to return Silquitous to play, use Silquitous' effect to return manifestation to your hand, you return an opponent's card to their hand. Your end result is Silquitous is in your graveyard, manifestation is in your hand. So in your turn you can set the manifestation again, and that's a loop. Silk plus Conqueror it's basically the phase 2 combo, but without the manifestation, and it's quite important, the manifestation. You're not truly in phase 2 without it, but so long as you have these cards unmolested, you can negate and bounce one You can negate one attack and bounce one thing per turn cycle. Marionette and Prime Banshee is more of an endgame combo. You can use this to quickly transition cards from the graveyard to the field on the hand. Like this is usually how you can get Concrete out of the graveyard back into your hand. Your Marionette can send your Prime Banshee to the graveyard, revive something you need out of the graveyard onto the field, and Prime Banshee will trigger and get something out of the graveyard into the hand. So if you're swimming in link materials, you haven't consumed Multifaker's special summon effects yet, you have set manifestations, you can consolidate them into Prime Banshees and Marionettes to just move your Altergeists around to the zones they need to be in. Alright, so now let's talk about linking into Hexstia, who is, as I've said here, a powerful boss, but also a way to maneuver other Altergeists to more desirable zones. So linking into Hexstia has those two main purposes. It's to maneuver the cards to desirable zones, and to create a powerful boss monster. When you're considering whether to link and what to link with, consider the home zones of the Altergeist cards. And I've used this example a lot in the presentation, but I'll use it again. For example, Meluseek is good in the graveyard, but Concrete is bad in the graveyard. Therefore, linking with Meluseek is good, but linking with Concrete is undesirable. Similarly, pointing to Meluseek is good, because Hexstia's effect will move a card to the graveyard, but pointing to Concrete is undesirable. So, hopefully you're starting to see now how this concept of home zones will help inform your decisions as you're playing it. Where are you going to summon Concrete? Well, you want to put it somewhere where Hexstia is not pointing, for example. Hexstia herself can be linked away to make a new Hexstia, and that allows you to move cards from the field to the graveyard and from the deck to the hand. So whatever other link material used with the Hexstia, you move from the field to the graveyard, and Hexstia's own effect lets you search for any Altergeist card, monster or trap, when she's sent from the field to the graveyard, so that moves a card from deck to hand. Hexstia's arrows are important and are the main consideration for where you're placing your main deck monsters at all stages of the game. So let's talk about that. So usually, Hexstia will be pointing to the leftmost or the rightmost main monster zones, because she points straight down from the extra monster zone. Therefore, as a general rule, you avoid summoning Concrete into those zones, unless you know for certain it's a zone that Hexstia will not point to. Hexstia loves to point to Marionette to get a huge attack buff, puts it to 3100, just enough to beat over something like Blue Eyes. 3k is usually like the big threshold in Yu-Gi-Oh! Meluseek loves to be pointed at by Hexstia so that she can trigger her search. And then Hexstia loves to point to and be pointed at by more copies of itself. It gets a substantial attack buff from itself, and it also triggers itself when it sends itself to the graveyard. Silquidus and Multifaker have some interesting considerations. Should you point to Silquidus, or should you point to Multifaker? Both have the graveyard as a good zone, they both want to get linked into the graveyard. But Silquidus also has the field as a good zone, whereas Multifaker doesn't. So you'd think you'd more favourably want to be pointed to Multifaker because you want to move Multifaker more than you want to move Silquidus. It actually changes depending on the context. So if no other Altergeist cards are present for Silquidus to return as cost, then it's actually generally better for Hexstia to point to Silquidus. Otherwise, it's generally better for Hexstia to point to Multifaker. Why is that? So, if Silquidus cannot return anything else, like the only thing it can return as cost to get its effect is Multifaker, and Hexstia is pointing towards Multifaker and not Silquidus, then if you use Hexstia's effect to negate a spell or trap, you will tribute the Multifaker, and now Silquidus has no other cards for you to return as cost, so by using Hexstia's effect, you've given up on Silquidus' effect. And it also works the other way. If you use Silquidus to return the Multifaker to your hand, you get to bounce a thing, but now Hexstia is not pointing to anything, and she can't use her effect to negate a spell or trap. So in this case, it's better for Hexstia to point to Silquidus. What happens if Hexstia is pointing to Silquidus? If you need to bounce an opponent's card, you can use Silquidus to return Multifaker and bounce a card, and then you still have a Silquidus being pointed to by Hexstia, you also get the spell and trap negate. If you have to negate a spell or trap first, then you tribute the Silquidus to the Hexstia. You no longer have Silquidus' effect, you can't bounce the Multifaker. So in this case, it's like it was pointed to Multifaker, you only got to use one of the two effects. But if Hexstia's pointed Silquidus in this scenario, you actually have the chance, the opportunity to use both effects, whereas there's no way to use both effects if it's pointing to multi-faker. If you have cards other than multi-faker that Silkwoodus can turn as cost, then you want Hexstia to point to multi-faker because the graveyard is good for multi-faker, but the field is only neutral, and Silkwoodus can maintain value by staying on the field. And this is one of the reasons why Altergeist is so complicated, correctly anticipating where Hexstia will be pointing and what will be good there. And to be honest, this is something I still struggle with, but you'll get better with it as you play the deck more. Now we've got the fundamentals covered, we can finally talk about how to actually play in each phase. So when you're in phase 1 survive, this is so crucial. Remember your goal. With every play that you make, remember your goal. Your goal is to transition to phase 2 in as few of your opponent's turns as possible. So, your priorities are, number 1, survive. If there's no point just dying. Number 2 is transition to phase 2. If you can't do that, then you worry about disrupting your opponent. So if you don't need all your resources to survive, try to transition. If you can't transition, then you disrupt. So how does that translate into playing? So Meluseek. Meluseek is nerfed in Duel Links compared to Master Duel or TCG because there's no main phase 2. You have to make a choice. Are you going to attack with Meluseek to send one of your opponent's cards to the graveyard, or are you going to link Meluseek away to trigger the search effect? Well, if we look at these priorities here, you gotta survive. Alright, so apart from Link Rebo being an option for linking, survive isn't really a consideration here. Transition. Well, Meluseek can help us transition by finding multi-faker, for example. So before we get to 3, we do this, transition. Number 3, disrupt, doesn't come up because we're trying to transition while we're in phase 1. The only reason you might not link Meluseek away and use it to attack or stay on the field is if somehow that actually does help you survive, and there are niche circumstances where that's true and survive is more important. Survive, I don't mean overly survive, you don't have to play extra defensive, I mean just make sure that you do survive, the bare minimum you need to survive. For example, Lunalights are currently being played in the meta, and Lunalight Fusion gets better if you have a monster in the link, if you have an extra monster zone. So if you link away Meluseek, it makes a Fusion easier to use, which might mean that you die when you otherwise wouldn't. It probably won't mean that, but I'm just trying to think of an example why you wouldn't link Meluseek away. So how to play in phase 2 control. So the resources it takes to transition to phase 3, they could be needed to re-establish the Trinity in phase 2, and what that Trinity is: the Silkwoodus on the field, the Conquering in the hand, and the set manifestation. As I said earlier, your goal is to comfortably survive an opponent's turn with minimal resources required to re-establish the Trinity in your own turn. Those resources are things like normal summons, your once per turn effects, your set traps. If you achieve this, you can use those resources, instead of to re-establish the Trinity in your control from phase 2, use those resources to transition to phase 3. So for example here, if the only thing you need to change after the opponent's turn is return Query from the field to the hand, and you already have Silkwoodus in play, it's completely trivial. You just use Silkwoodus' effect to return Query to your hand. That's all the resources you need to use is your Silkwoodus' effect. And you've got a set manifestation, a Silcon field, a Conquering hand. So now you can use a manifestation and your normal summon, maybe a multi-faker effect, to transition to phase 3. What is phase 3? Phase 3 dominate. It's the easiest way to lose to yourself, because you have so many resources available to you and it's easy to consolidate them and make those misplays. So just make sure you don't consolidate them too much. The general rule is that you can do whatever you like, so long as you don't make it uncomfortable to re-establish the Trinity. So make sure you still got that Conquering hand, Silcon field, manifestation set, and just don't set yourself back. Otherwise, phase 3 is a clean win. You make giant Hexstias, you nullify your opponent's cards, and attack for lethal. And I'll elaborate more on that in just a moment, as we get to Link Away Hexstia. Sorry, oh no, so I've already talked about that. So you'll have extra resources lying around. I'll show you some replays after this presentation, which shows a more clear delineation. I understand and I appreciate it can be a bit abstract listening to what I'm talking about right now, but it will make sense later. Just have the concept in mind. Okay, so now I'll get onto some advanced variations that weren't included in my original version of this video, and those are skip concurry and the Altergeist Lock. So if we skip concurry, what's this? So if you don't need concurry, then it's better to get Marionette access for turn 2. So if you get Marionette on turn 2, then it lets you... So the common scenario is when you do the phase 1 opening of Meluseek and Manifestation, and then you get everything set up, you have Multifake on the board and Silquidus on the board, you've returned one of their cards to their hand with the Manifestation. If you don't need the concrete at this point, with the search from Meluseek, instead of getting concrete, you can find Marionette. And what this allows is on your next turn, you can link your Multifaker and your Silquidus that are surviving on the board. So you're doing this if you're surviving. You link them into Hexstia. Then you summon Marionette to Hexstia's zone, which now turns on Hexstia's spell and trap negate. Depending on what you're expecting in the context of the board state, you can actually swap this order. You could summon the Marionette first, so when you link the Hexstia, it's already pointing to the Marionette and instantly active, so it makes the Hexstia less vulnerable. Or you can do it the other way and make the Hexstia first, which will make the Marionette less vulnerable. Either way, you summon the Marionette, and then you get a Altergeist trap, such as Manifestation, from your deck onto the field, and then you use Marionette to swap itself with an Altergeist in the graveyard. So you can get Multifaker, which can then find another Meluseek, and that's more link material, which they then can find the concurry. You can get Meluseek if you need Meluseek in attack position, because Multifaker's special summon always special summons in defense, so if the attack from Meluseek is important, then you can just get Meluseek from your graveyard directly. You can also have Hexstia pointing at the Meluseek as well. Multifaker can also get another copy of Silquidus from the deck, so then you can link away the Hexstia and Multifaker into another Hexstia, use Hexstia's effect to find the concurry if you need to. You might be able to get away without as many, without finding concurry. Or sometimes it is correct to just get Silquidus straight back from your graveyard. It all depends on what's going on. Maybe you don't have any Silquidus left in the deck, for example. So the Altergeist Lock. So let's talk about these three cards. Altergeist Fiffinilag, Altergeist Camouflage, and Altergeist Emulate Elf. These are all terrible cards, but together they form the unstoppable Altergeist Lock. And we've got a meme on you here a bit. Altergeist Lock, that's impossible. Nobody's been able to summon that before. Well, it turns out it's actually very possible, and it's not as detrimental to the deck as it looks. So how does the lock work? So Fiffinilag forces the opponent to attack it and target it with monster effects. Camouflage equips onto Fiffinilag and makes Fiffinilag unable to be attacked, but you can still be attacked directly. It also negates any monster effects that target Fiffinilag. Emulate Elf prevents the opponent from attacking directly because it's just a monster, it becomes a monster and your opponent can't attack directly if there was a monster there. And it protects Camouflage from targeted and destruction effects. And then we go full circle as Fiffinilag protects Emulate Elf from effects that can target monsters or from being attacked. So the end result is the opponent cannot attack, and the lock demands very specific interaction for them to deal with it. So all you have to do is save your interaction for the only outs that are in your opponent's deck. And you can think of, you can think of the Altergeist Lock as a variant of Phase 2. Instead of using Concrete, Silquidus control the board, using this more static lock, and just saving your interaction to control the game flow instead. So why would you use the Altergeist Lock? So all of the Altergeist in-engine disruption targets, except for Conqueries negating of attacks. And sometimes the meta has threatening monsters that can't be targeted. And here's an example of one, Lunalight Leodon. So very popular right now, is at the time of making this video, Selena's having her rerun event, and people are really excited to use her. There are examples of non-threatening untargetable monsters, and those are Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon and Lunalight Saber Dancer. Those are just huge monsters that aren't very threatening because Concrete can negate them, and they're protected, but they're just huge. Leo Dance is different, it's threatening because it attacks twice. It puts a lot of pressure on your Concrete, and if it does actually make an attack, you don't have the luxury of not using Concrete on it, it will wipe your board. So, if the meta does have a threatening monster like that, that's a reason to use the Altergeist Lock. And we'll go back here when we talk about Altergeist Lock as a variant of Phase 2. You can use it to transition to Phase 3. There's some special considerations for it. I might talk about that more when I show a replay of it. But why is the Altergeist Lock not as detrimental to the deck as it looks? And it's because Altergeists have a powerful engine that don't often need to rely on generic staples. You don't need things like IDP, in fact that actively conflicts with Multifaker, or the compulsory evacuation device, or things like that, because Altergeists can already do so much. Which means when you're swapping out 3 generic cards for these 3 terrible cards, the impact of the deck is quite minimal because you've still got the rest of the Altergeist engine intact. And if we look at these traps, Camouflage and Emulate Elf, they're easily triggerable, and your main priority in Phase 1 is just to trigger Multifaker, right? Like, that's your easy to think about priority, is trigger Multifaker, and both of these can do that very easily. It often doesn't really matter what the effect of the trap is that you're using to trigger Multifaker, it just matters that you activated a trap in the first place, so that you triggered Multifaker. And that's why it's not actually that bad. It surprised me. I just tried it out and it turned out to be quite decent. So in conclusion, well, that concludes this presentation. Now I'm going to go on to Duel Links, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about in action and help consolidate all of that information into your brain, help you understand what's going on. So we'll start with this replay which I used in the old version of this video, because it just really shows a good, very clear transitions from Phase 1 to 2 to 3. And it also shows a misplay loop which I made, which helps emphasize the order of operations I was talking about in Phase 1. We're playing against a rocket player.
Notated. I never expected to battle
please don't pay too much attention to the exact deck list. The Jar of Greed, I feel like I have to explain myself. This is me testing the limits of Altergeist, and from me playing Jars of Greed instead of actual good traps, this is where I learned that Altergeists don't need to rely so much on traps. I'm playing Jar of Greed as a learning experience, not because I think it's the best in slot trap in Altergeists. Anyway,
the tuner monster, Rocket Tracer.
So he does his normal rocket things and sets up his turn 1 board. I've got the perfect opener here of Melody Seeker Manifestation, so I can use this to show you what your main game plan is.
Metal Rocket Dragon. I know what to do.
Void Ogre isn't as threatening as it seems in the matchup, but something to consider with Void Ogre Dragon is that it negates activations, not effects, and because it negates the activation of a trap, that trap can't trigger Multifaker, because Multifaker needs your activation to actually work. Anyway,
Here I go. I draw Altergeist Lock.
So we summon Meluseek, and what I should have done, I should have linked this away into Linkuriboh and found Multifaker, and then I'd have that entire setup done, right? I got greedy, I let the, I can attack Meluseek go through, then I get punished with Book of Moon. To be fair, if he was playing better, he should have Book of Moon the Meluseek immediately up on my normal summon, so I wouldn't have had a chance to even link it away. But he gave me the chance to make the correct play, and I still made the wrong play. And stuff like that is ultimately going to make you play worse.
I know what to do. I build the overlay network. I set battle. I won't let you escape.
Luckily, we basically get to act as if we linked it away here, and so I can use this to still teach you the Phase 1 plays. So now we use the manifestation to get back the Meluseek. It triggers the Multifaker in our hand. This is very minor disruption that we don't really care about. We get the Multifaker triggers and gets the Synchronous. We don't have query access because of the Nightmare, but it doesn't matter so much.
tutor monster. With
My
this,
turn.
I end my turn.
So we're getting there. We're getting to phase 2. We're not quite set up, but we're getting close, right?
I'll create a circuit that links the known.
So I make Hexstia here, and the Meluseek and the Silk trigger, so we get the manifestation back. We have the Silkwood in play on the field, and now we have the Concurry. And now we're set up for phase 2. So we will transition into phase 3 when we can survive a turn with this setup. A Conk in hand, a Silk in play, a manifestation set.
But now,
I don't know why I agreed here, that was a mistake. It was obviously going to get negated by Void Ogre Dragon.
Rocket Tracer activates its Magna Rocket.
So we haven't managed to survive a turn really yet, have we? So let's see what happens. We just re-established the control. I have to do it while he's got a card in hand, otherwise Void Ogre is going to negate the trap.
I set a card with this battle. Go!
I activate Altergeist Silk.
Rocket Tracer activates.
Altergeist Conquery's effect activates from my hand.
So using Silkwood's bounce effect on the Rocket Tracer there forces him to use Rocket Tracer on itself, otherwise he'll turn off his own Void Ogre Dragon. But we're getting, this is the phase 2 lock of I'm getting to stop 3 attacks. I stopped Void Ogre Dragon, I stopped Rocket Tracer from attacking, and I stopped a 3rd attack as well with Concurry.
Attack, Magna Rocket Dragon. I end
Here I
my
go.
turn.
I draw Altergeist Marionetter. I'll set a card.
Alright, so we're re-establishing our phase 2.
Altergeist Marionetter's Altergeist Silkwidis.
I'll play this.
I activate Altergeist Silkwidis's effect.
We've got our set manifestation, we've got the Silkwidis in play, we've got a Concurry in our hand.
Dillingerous Dragon.
And we're almost invincible in the battle phase now. Like, he's only got 3 monsters, so we are invincible from these attacks.
I activate Altergeist Conquery's effect.
I decided not to return the 3rd attacker to the hand, just disrupt to the back row, because I don't actually care about the Silkwidis dying here, because I have another set manifestation, which is basically the same as getting a Silkwidis back.
Here I go.
And now I have so many, it's so easy to re-establish the board I already had.
Monster.
All I have to do is activate the set manifestation, I'll still have a manifestation in hand, and I will have the Silkwidis in play. Such minimal resource usage, I go into phase 3. I linked away Concurry, but that's because I plan to get rid of this Prime Banshee, which will easily return the Concurry, so there's no special reason why Concurry is okay to go into the graveyard there.
Prime Banshee activates when she's sent to the graveyard. Altergeist Marionette. I set a card. I activate my trap. Link to
And we have such control of the game at this point, we can basically do whatever we like. We have so many resources.
up here.
And we can easily negate anything that they're doing, get back the Silkwidis in the graveyard, we've still got the Concurry in their hand, we can do whatever we like. We are now in phase 3 Dominate.
My turn. I draw. Boot sector launches effect activate.
And once you're in Dominate, there's nothing they can do really. And we can just spin our wheels. It really doesn't matter anything they're doing. We can negate, we can send, we can get resources back. So hopefully that game was a really good example for you of phase 1, 2 and 3. I'm going to show you 2 more replays before I wrap up this video. What have we got here? I'm going to show you against Lunalights and against Blue Eyes. And this is more to show you why... So I'm going to show you the lock. I'm showing off the Altergeist Lock here. So that's a variant that you can include in your Altergeist deck.
The bigger the threat.
So our phase 2 plan now is different. It's to set up the lock.
Duel. I activate the spell card Polymerization. I create a new lunar legend. Fusions. Shine.
I'm not going to comment on their play too much. It doesn't matter whether they're playing well or badly. It just matters as an educational purpose for you.
Lunalight Tiger's Pendulum of Years. Lunalight Yellow Martin. Lunalight Yellow Martin. I activate my
I believe they could have made Leo Dancer here, but for some reason they made Saber Dancer. But even if this is a Leo Dancer, my plays is still going to be just as effective against it. So we draw into the ability to complete the lock. Because Marionetta can set the piece we're missing, Camouflage. We've got Emulate Elf in our hand, and when we activate one of these, we're going to trigger Multifaker and get the Fifth-in-a-Leg out of our deck. I actually spent a long time here deciding whether or not to link Marionetta away. If I link Marionetta away, because I need 3 zones, because I want to trigger Multifaker with Emulate Elf, so then the Camouflage is still free to equip onto the Fifth-in-a-Leg. And when Emulate Elf summons itself to a zone, I need 2 zones open. I need one for Multifaker and one for the Fifth-in-a-Leg. And that is a reason to link the Marionetta away. But if I link Marionetta away, it turns their Lunalight Fusion on. It makes it a lot easier for them to fusion summon. What I ultimately decide on is I cannot just absorb a hit from this and I won't die, and that will clear the Marionetta for me, and then I can summon the lock. If this was Leo Dancer, it's the exact same consideration. It doesn't matter that Leo Dancer could wipe the field because there'd be nothing to wipe. They would have already killed my only monster. And I will assemble a lock before it can attack again. So let's just watch that play out. So they go, they kill this, and then here's Emulate Elf, here's Multifaker, Multifaker gets Fifth-in-a-Leg, and then Camouflage on the Fifth-in-a-Leg, they can no longer attack. Zone management is really important when you're doing this lock. You usually actually want to make Hexstia first before you can get the Emulate Elf down, because otherwise you have to link away the Emulate Elf, as you just saw there. But now, your game plan is simple. You chip them down with Meluseek, or if they present a board where you win just by making Borreload Dragon, then you make Borreload Dragon, and you win that way. This board is slightly vulnerable because it doesn't have the Emulate Elf, but it's enough to force them to concede. And finally, I'm going to show basically the same thing, but against Blue Eyes this time, and really emphasizing the monster protection that Fifth-in-a-Leg gives you as well. I might speed this up a little bit, just to get to the parts which make the point I'm trying to make. So our phase 2 plan is to assemble the lock. They're spinning their wheels, they're doing their Blue Eyes things. Another thing to important, I don't want to make this video too much about matchup specific things, but Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon can negate Meluseek in your graveyard, so it would be a waste to normal summon Meluseek here when I have better options available. Luckily I have personal spoofing, so I have easy Faker access anyway. But look, I've got these 2 traps assembled, I've got personal spoofing, I'm going to be able to assemble the lock.
Come on out. I activate my monster emerge. Dragon Spirit of White's up.
Luckily they don't hit one of the lock cards, so I can demonstrate it. It wouldn't be a disaster if they did hit one of these cards, because I always have the normal phase 2 option I can go into, but this way I at least get to show off the lock. Now, Dragon Spirit of White is not going to be able to remove Camouflage because it's protected by Emulate Elf. We can see here he's trying to target something to break him out of the lock, but Camouflage negates it because he has to try and remove Fifth-in-a-Leg. It's going to do it again. He's going to try and destroy Fifth-in-a-Leg because he has no choice but to try and destroy Fifth-in-a-Leg, and then Camouflage will negate it. And then he tries to win in battle phase, but he can't attack anything because of the Fifth-in-a-Leg and the Camouflage.
I activate my monster's effect.
And Blue Eyes' entire game plan is to try and defeat you through battle. So now we start moving into phase 3.
I activate Altergeist Marion Altergeist when multi-faker is Altergeist Silk. I activate Altergeist.
You also get a free silk bounce basically, because you can just bounce the camouflage. You don't need it in your own turn. You can just set it again. But I went through Silkwoodus so I could get my Emulate health back, and then I have the full setup. Hexstia to protect my lock from any spells and traps that could interrupt it. Emulate health protects camouflage, camouflage protects fifth lag protects everything else.
The souls of Blue Eyes Alt. This isn't over between us.
He realizes he can only target the fifth lag, etc., and he concedes. And so that is how to play Altergeists well. Maybe not exactly that specific play pattern. Maybe the lock isn't always going to be correct, and I'm not trying to advocate for it in general. It's just an option that's there for you. But everything which I've shown you in this presentation, I hope is helpful and helps improve your own Altergeist gameplay. Just as a reminder, we've got the 3-phase game plan, home zones, your micro combos, and linking into Hexstia before we get to the advanced variations. Good luck, Duelist, and hopefully I'll meet you on the ladder.